In the year 2250, humanity had grown to become a significant player in the galaxy, a part of the vast galactic federation that spanned hundreds of star systems. Among the many species that called the stars home, there was one that had earned a reputation for its military might, the Tzal. A highly advanced species with a terrifyingly efficient empire, the Tzal ruled through precision, strategy, and technology that was centuries ahead of most others. Varkan, one of their most skilled and respected commanders, had fought countless battles against enemies of all kinds, from hostile alien races to rogue factions within their own empire. The Tzal were known for their mastery of energy shields, cloaking devices, and weapons that could reduce entire fleets to ashes with a single strike. No species had ever been able to stand against them for long, and Varkan had seen it all. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared him for what happened on that fateful day when they first encountered humanity's military. It all began during a routine reconnaissance mission at the outer edges of the galaxy, where the Tzal had recently picked up signals from a human ship. Varkan, eager for a new challenge, ordered his fleet to engage. The humans had made their presence known, and it was time for the Tzal to show them who controlled the stars. As Varkan's fleet approached, the human warship came into view, its massive frame stark against the backdrop of the endless void. The Tzal warships were sleek and deadly, equipped with advanced targeting systems that could lock onto a target from light years away. Varkan watched as the human ship started its maneuvers. It was almost comical at first. Nothing about it seemed impressive. There were no energy shields flickering into place, no sleek weapons charging up. Just an old-fashioned, bulky vessel that seemed out of place in the grand theater of the galaxy. But then, as the human ship powered up its weapons, Varkan's initial amusement quickly turned to confusion. Instead of the high-tech energy blasts that he had expected, the human warship unleashed a barrage of what seemed like of all things metal objects. They weren't precision missiles or advanced energy bolts. They were just huge chunks of metal, flying through space at seemingly random angles. As they hurtled toward his ships, they left trails of fire and smoke behind them, like some ancient weapon from an era long forgotten. Varkan's first instinct was to laugh. What kind of attack was this? It was as if the humans had dug into their planet's most primitive weaponry and just launched anything they could find. There was no order, no precision in the attack. The metal objects clanged against his fleet's shields with a disturbing force, causing unexpected cracks in the otherwise impenetrable defense. The ships groaned as the projectiles bounced off, some even tearing through the outer hulls of his ships. Varkan narrowed his eyes, trying to process what he was seeing. "What is this?" he muttered under his breath. "Some kind of primitive attack?" He could barely comprehend the sheer absurdity of it. He had fought against species with deadly energy cannons, devastating plasma charges, and unimaginable technology. Yet here were these human ships, firing scrap metal, and worse still, the damage was real. His shields, built to withstand the finest weapons the galaxy could offer, were struggling against this ridiculous assault. He was convinced that this was some form of deception, a trap designed to lull him into a false sense of security. Maybe these humans were trying to mask their true capabilities, but they were clearly not even trying to fight like the other species he had encountered. He ordered his fleet to engage their cloaking devices, attempting to confuse the enemy, but the humans didn't seem bothered by this either. Their ships were still firing in every direction, without care or aim. The randomness of the attack made it almost impossible to predict. It was a chaotic dance, unpredictable and violent, and yet it seemed to be working. The Tzal had long prided themselves on their strategic superiority. Every attack they launched was precise, calculated to overwhelm the enemy with the minimum amount of force necessary. Their weapons were deadly, efficient, and effective. And yet here they were, faced with what appeared to be anarchy. How could these humans be so effective with such a simple, clumsy strategy? Varkan was left with more questions than answers as the battle raged on. With each passing minute, the human tactics only seemed more absurd and more dangerous. What kind of species fought like this? Why would they waste their precious resources on something so haphazard? He watched perplexed as the humans continued their bizarre assault. The Tzal fleet had advanced energy weapons, systems that could slice through the hulls of any ship with ease. Yet, these human projectiles, simple chunks of metal, some even of scrap, were managing to cause damage. It wasn't just the randomness of the attack. It was that there was something else. Something about the way the humans fought seemed to be getting under Varkan's skin. They weren't adhering to any pattern, any sort of formal structure. And yet, somehow, they seemed to be winning. The Tzal had the firepower to obliterate them, yet the humans didn't back down. They didn't hesitate. They just kept firing, kept launching these absurd projectiles, each one exploding on impact with a force that defied logic. As Varkan watched his shields falter under the barrage, he felt a strange sense of unease. This wasn't supposed to happen. This wasn't how warfare worked. He was no novice in battle, but the more he observed the human tactics, the more he realized that he was completely unable to predict what they would do next. The randomness, the sheer willpower to keep fighting, was unlike anything he had ever encountered. Varkan was no fool. He knew the rules of war. He knew that logic, precision, and strategy were the keys to victory. And yet, here were the humans, defying every rule of warfare he had ever learned. It was maddening, and it was effective. As the battle wore on, Varkan's respect for his enemies grew. This was no ordinary species. There was something about the humans that made them different. And as the conflict continued, Varkan had a sinking feeling that he was about to find out just how dangerous they could be. This version builds suspense and intrigue, keeping the reader engaged with a sense of mystery and confusion on the part of the Tzal commander, Varkan. Let me know if you need any changes or if you want me to continue. As the battle continued to unfold, Varkan's initial confusion was quickly replaced by growing frustration. He had seen many forms of warfare across the galaxy, clever tactics, intricate strategies, and the devastating power of advanced technology. But this was madness. The humans, for all their supposed inferiority, were using what appeared to be a weapon straight out of a long-forgotten era. Massive cannons, crude and ugly in design, fired enormous chunks of metal toward the Tzal fleet with seemingly no rhyme or reason. The projectiles, trailing clouds of fire and smoke, slammed into Varkan's ships with a surprising force. They weren't designed to be precise like the energy beams or plasma shots his fleet usually faced. No, these objects simply flew through space like oversized missiles, careening across the void at random angles. It was as if the humans were flinging debris at them, hardly a weapon by any advanced civilization's standard. Varkan sneered at the sight, convinced that this was some form of distraction or perhaps a tactical bluff. The human fleet had to be hiding their real power, surely. There was no way this haphazard attack could cause any meaningful damage. But as the projectiles impacted the shields of his flagship, his cocky confidence quickly turned to disbelief. The first hit barely registered, as his shields absorbed the shockwave without issue, but the second and the third. They caused cracks to appear. Minor at first, but with each successive strike, the damage became more pronounced. The force was enough to disrupt the delicate balance of the Tzal energy shields, causing temporary flickers in their protective fields. It wasn't supposed to happen. The Tzal had perfected their energy shields over centuries of warfare, designing them to withstand anything, from heavy artillery to direct blasts from star-destroying weapons. And yet here they were, struggling to defend against these flying chunks of metal. The projectiles, though primitive in appearance, were clearly not as ineffective as Varkan had assumed. They were striking his ships in ways that defied all logic. The metal was not just bouncing off. It was tearing into the vulnerable points of the hulls, where the shields were weakest. Varkan gritted his teeth in frustration. How could this be? It didn't make sense. His most advanced sensors couldn't detect any kind of specialized technology in these weapons. They were just simple metallic objects, no more sophisticated than the kind of things an old, unsophisticated race might use. Yet, somehow, they were causing the kind of chaos that no advanced weapon should be able to create. Was it sheer luck? Was this really just a random attack with no strategy behind it? His mind raced, trying to analyze what was happening, but the human tactics only seemed to grow more bizarre by the second. The Tzal fleet, which had been an unstoppable force throughout the galaxy, was struggling to fight back. It wasn't that they were losing, not yet, but the unpredictability of the human attack was beginning to wear on their confidence. As the minutes dragged on, Varkan felt a gnawing sense of unease, a growing suspicion that he was missing something crucial. His ships were taking hits, but they could still fight. They could still win. He just needed to think, to adapt. Desperate to regain control, Varkan ordered his fleet to launch their energy weapons, the weapons they trusted above all else. "Engage primary weapons," he barked. The battle tactics of the Tzal were based on precision, overwhelming force, and devastating energy weapons. It had worked in every other engagement they had faced, and he was confident that it would work again. The Tzal warships powered up their weapons, and beams of brilliant, searing light shot across the expanse, targeting the human ship. But to Varkan's growing disbelief, the humans didn't seem to care. The human ship's shields flared briefly under the energy strikes, but then, astonishingly, it dodged. It was impossible. The human vessel should have been obliterated in an instant, yet the ship twisted and turned in ways that defied logic. Its movement wasn't calculated or precise, but erratic, almost as if the crew had no idea what they were doing. Yet somehow, they managed to avoid the majority of the Tzal's deadly fire. It was as if the human ship were alive, breathing in the chaos of battle, shifting with every pulse of fire sent in its direction. Varkan clenched his fists. How were they doing this? The human ship wasn't fast. It wasn't equipped with the kind of advanced propulsion systems that the Tzal had perfected. Yet, every time the Tzal's weapons locked onto the target, the humans seemed to know exactly how to evade them. It was uncanny. It wasn't skill or advanced technology at work here. It was instinct. The humans were fighting not with the sophistication of high-tech tools, but with pure, reckless, human unpredictability. Their strategy was nothing like what Varkan had studied throughout his career. There was no elegance, no order to it, but it worked. And every time his energy beams missed, the human ship would adjust. There was no pattern to the movement, no rhythm. The ship simply danced, moving unpredictably in every direction, as though the humans were laughing at the very idea of strategy. Varkan's mind raced. Was this the power of humanity? The simple, chaotic, unrelenting will to survive? The Tzal fought to win humanity, it seemed, fought to never be predictable. To throw their enemies off balance, to always be one step ahead, even if they didn't know where that step would land. The battlefield now felt completely alien to Varkan. For the first time in his military career, he wasn't in control. He could predict the tactics of the fiercest alien species, anticipate their movements and counter their strategies, but not this. These humans, these primitive, irrational creatures, had somehow turned the very concept of warfare on its head. Varkan's ships were still firing, still launching their advanced weapons, but with each passing moment, it became clearer that the humans weren't fighting to defeat him with overwhelming force. They were fighting to break the very rules of war, to disorient him, to make him second-guess every strategy he had ever known. As Varkan watched the human ship dodge another energy beam with an almost defiant agility, the truth began to dawn on him. This wasn't just a battle. This was a test of everything he had ever believed about combat. And right now, humanity was winning. This continuation ramps up the suspense and builds on the idea that the Tzal are slowly realizing they are out of their depth. The unpredictability of humanity's methods is becoming more apparent, and Varkan is starting to feel the weight of his own confusion and frustration. Let me know if you need any changes or if you'd like to continue. As the battle continued, the strange nature of humanity's tactics only deepened Varkan's confusion. His fleet had, by all measures, superior technology. Yet, these humans, with their bizarre, primitive weapons and unpredictable strategies, were making a mockery of his superior forces. The damage to his ships wasn't just a fluke. It was deliberate, precise in its own chaotic way, and Varkan couldn't grasp how or why. What kind of species used brute force and sheer unpredictability as their main weapons? It was clear now humanity wasn't following any known rules of warfare. There had to be some deeper explanation, something that he wasn't seeing. He had fought against species with far greater technology, but never had he encountered a foe like this. It wasn't just that they were fighting differently, they were fighting in a way that completely defied logic. His frustration grew with each passing moment, and he knew he had to understand what was driving this madness if he was to overcome it. This point, Varkan's curiosity outweighed his anger. He needed answers. As the Tzal fleet continued its assault on the human warship, he ordered one of his scouts to board the human vessel and capture a prisoner. It was a simple plan: capture a human, bring them aboard, and force them to explain what was happening. It would be a small victory, a chance to understand the madness. Soon enough, the human was brought aboard, a woman with sharp eyes and a confident stance. Her name was Sergeant Evelyn Hayes, and Varkan had expected her to be shaking in fear, intimidated by the power of the Tzal. But instead of trembling, the human soldier appeared almost amused. There was no fear in her eyes, no anxiety at all. In fact, she seemed almost comfortable in her surroundings, as if she were sitting in a caf instead of a warship in the middle of an ongoing battle. Varkan studied her closely, his patience thinning. "You must be confused," he began, trying to hold his growing frustration in check. "Your species has caused us more trouble than any other in recent memory. What weapon were you using? The projectiles you launched, they were ludicrous. Primitive. Why would you use such a ridiculous weapon against us?" Sergeant Hayes tilted her head slightly, an almost amused smile tugging at the corner of her lips. She didn't respond immediately, instead taking in her surroundings with an air of casual indifference. The Tzal ship was vast, a marvel of engineering designed for war and intimidation. It was the kind of place that would make most beings feel small. But not this human. No, she seemed unfazed by the grandeur and might of the Tzal Empire. Varkan's sharp eyes narrowed. This was not the reaction he'd expected. She was clearly not afraid. Ridiculous? Sergeant Hayes finally spoke, her voice calm, almost teasing. "What's ridiculous is how predictable you all are." She shrugged as if the matter were of little consequence. "But if you want to know, we didn't use anything fancy. We just used what we had." Varkan blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" He was growing impatient. "You fired metal objects at us with nothing more than brute force. How is that even possible? You rely on this nonsense while we possess the finest technology in the galaxy." Sergeant Hayes leaned back slightly in her seat, her expression a mix of amusement and something else, a quiet confidence that seemed to mock the very foundation of Varkan's beliefs. She studied him for a moment before answering, her tone calm and almost respectful. "It's called a shotgun, sir." "A shotgun?" Varkan echoed incredulously, barely able to contain his disbelief. "A weapon so primitive that it spreads shots randomly across its target? That's your answer? How does something like that even have any effect on us?" Sergeant Hayes's smile didn't fade. "It's simple, really," she began, her voice steady, yet carrying an underlying power. "Humans don't rely on precision the way you do. We don't fight to create perfect, efficient attacks. We fight to overwhelm. We don't care if our shots are a little off target. We just keep firing until something hits. And when it does, it hits hard." Varkan felt the blood rush to his head. He was losing patience, but he kept himself in check, desperate for answers. "Overwhelm?" he repeated, his voice tight with disbelief. "You're telling me that you throw things at us and hope for the best?" Sergeant Hayes gave a single, almost dismissive nod. "That's the thing. You're so focused on being perfect. Precision, efficiency. You rely on your technology to do everything for you, to make sure every shot is flawless. But humans? We don't have that luxury. So we do what we can. We fight dirty. We fight ugly. And sometimes, we fight better because of it. We don't care about looking good in battle. We care about winning." Varkan felt something shift within him, something he couldn't quite name. It wasn't fear, but a gnawing sense of awe. The human soldier before him was speaking with an unsettling amount of confidence, too much, in fact. She wasn't boasting, She was simply stating facts, facts that seemed to cut to the heart of what he had always assumed was true about warfare. Humanity had learned over time to embrace their own imperfections, to use what was at hand rather than depending on flawless systems and weapons. This randomness, this chaotic unpredictability, it wasn't a flaw. It was their strength. For the first time in his life, Varkan felt as if he were the one who was being outsmarted. His advanced strategies, his superior technology, were built on the assumption that warfare followed rules that humanity simply refused to accept. Their unpredictability had thrown off every calculation he had made, every plan he had devised. Sergeant Hayes saw the flicker of realization in his eyes. "You see it now, don't you?" she asked, her voice low and thoughtful. "Humans don't fight with the best weapons or the smartest tactics. We fight with everything we've got. And we fight until we break whatever it is you think you know about war." Varkan stood silent for a long moment, his mind reeling. The Tzal had never faced an enemy like this before. Humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their technology, wasn't their firepower, it was their adaptability, their sheer will to do whatever it took to win. He had underestimated them, and now, as he stared at the human prisoner before him, he realized just how dangerous that mistake had been. But it wasn't over yet. The battle was still raging, and the Tzal would not give up easily. Varkan's pride burned as hot as ever, but now something else burned within him as well, a respect for the unpredictability of humanity that he hadn't expected. A war unlike any other was unfolding, and the Tzal would have to adapt. Whether they could or not, however, was still uncertain. In this part, the true nature of humanity's tactics is revealed, leaving Varkan shaken and forced to confront how deeply he has misjudged them. The unpredictability of human warfare becomes their most dangerous weapon. Let me know if you want any changes or to continue with the story. In the days that followed Sergeant Hayes' capture and her strange, revealing explanation, Varkan became consumed by the idea that humanity was no longer simply a weaker, less technologically advanced species. No, they were something entirely different, something his years of experience hadn't prepared him for. Their tactics were unlike anything he had ever encountered. They fought not with the perfection of their tools, but with the unpredictable chaos of their minds. His entire view of warfare had been based on precision and order, but the humans, these creatures who should have been beneath the Tzal, had turned his world upside down. Now, Varkan felt a deep compulsion to understand. He pored over data, analyzed every scrap of information his fleet had gathered about human combat, and consulted his most trusted strategists. What he discovered only deepened his sense of bewilderment. The humans didn't just use brute force as he had first assumed, they wielded something far more powerful, the ability to surprise, to think unconventionally, and to act without fear of breaking the rules. The more Varkan studied, the clearer it became. Humans use their limited resources not just for destruction, but for deception. They would feign weakness, pretend to retreat, and then suddenly strike when their enemy least expected it. It wasn't about power, it was about timing, about outthinking their opponent, even if it meant embracing risk and uncertainty. The Tzal, with all their advanced technology, their superior weapons, and their highly disciplined tactics, had never faced a foe that fought like this. There was no pattern to it, no predictability. Every battle was a new puzzle, and the humans seemed to revel in making it impossible to solve. This, Varkan realized, was their true weapon, their mindset. His obsession grew. He had to beat them, to prove that the Tzal could adapt to anything, that their ancient empire was unbeatable. Yet, as he observed the humans more closely, something began to gnaw at him. The more he tried to understand them, the more he realized just how deeply ingrained their unpredictability was. The humans didn't just use tricks, they embraced the unknown. They were willing to make mistakes, to take risks, to face failure head-on, all in pursuit of victory. The very idea that they could act without the need for perfect strategies or flawless technology unsettled him to his core. It wasn't the tools they wielded, nor the power they commanded, but their mindset. They fought not with their weapons, but with their unyielding will to adapt, to never stop moving forward, no matter the cost. In an effort to overcome this new, unpredictable enemy, Varkan ordered his fleet to begin adapting their tactics. If humanity could fight with chaos, perhaps they too could embrace it. They had perfected precision, but now it was time to take a gamble, to embrace human-like tactics. Distraction and feigned retreat, these were the first changes Varkan implemented. He hoped that by using these tactics, they could catch the humans off guard, disrupt their methods, and force them to react. The Tzal ships began to pull back in seemingly disorganized formations, giving the impression that they were retreating. They then launched sudden strikes from unexpected angles, aiming to confuse the humans and make them doubt their own strategies. But as the battle played out, Varkan quickly realized how ineffective his tactics were. Every time they tried to pull off a feigned retreat or a surprise maneuver, the humans saw through it, adapting quicker than he had expected. It was as if they were anticipating their every move, countering them with an uncanny awareness of the Tzal's every weakness. Varkan's frustration mounted. He couldn't understand it. What made the humans so willing to take risks? What gave them the audacity to throw away traditional tactics and replace them with chaos? The Tzal's strategies, based on millennia of refinement, were still unmatched in terms of technological superiority. And yet, in every engagement with the humans, the Tzal seemed to fall short. The more Varkan tried to mimic human tactics, the more he realized that he couldn't match their willingness to act in the face of uncertainty. The humans didn't hesitate. They didn't second-guess themselves. They simply acted, regardless of the odds. And that was something the Tzal couldn't replicate, no matter how hard they tried. The true weight of the situation began to settle over Varkan. He'd always believed that military success came from control over the battlefield, control over the enemy, control over the outcome. But humanity wasn't about control. They were about adaptation. While the Tzal spent their energy refining their technology and perfecting their battle strategies, humanity spent theirs learning how to adapt in real time, how to improvise when everything seemed lost. It was a mindset that the Tzal could not easily replicate, and it terrified Varkan to his core. The more the Tzal tried to imitate the humans, the more they realized just how much of humanity's success lay in their willingness to not follow the rules. The humans didn't play by the same codes of conduct or military principles that Varkan had spent a lifetime mastering. They didn't value precision, they valued determination. They didn't care about looking invincible, they cared about winning by any means necessary. As the battle raged on, they were fighting a species that embraced failure as part of the process, one that thrived on chaos, that believed there was no such thing as a lost cause. Varkan was left with one burning question. How do you fight against an enemy that never stops evolving, never gives up, and never plays by the rules? The Tzal had made their name through order, through superior technology and perfect execution. But humanity had made its name by doing the impossible, by breaking every rule in the book, then writing a new one. As he watched another round of human fire tear into his ship's shield, Varkan couldn't help but wonder if this fight would ever be won by anything other than sheer will. In this part, Varkan becomes increasingly obsessed with trying to understand and replicate human tactics. But the more he tries, the more he realizes that their true strength lies in their willingness to embrace chaos and unpredictability. This shift in his thinking sets the stage for the final confrontation. Let me know if you'd like to continue or adjust anything. The final confrontation took place deep within the heart of the Tzal Empire, far from the galactic fringes where the battle had originally begun. This time, it was not a small skirmish or a fleeting encounter. It was the culmination of everything that had led up to this point. The Tzal fleet, though vast and technologically superior, was in disarray. Their once imposing ships now seemed sluggish, as if the weight of uncertainty and frustration had taken its toll. They had tried everything, adapting their tactics to mirror the chaotic human methods, experimenting with deception, using feigned retreats, and launching sudden strikes, all of it to no avail. Humanity had proven time and again that their unpredictability and raw will were more than enough to turn the tide of battle, no matter how much the Tzal tried to fight it. But now, as the Tzal gathered for one last assault, There was no more room for doubt. This would be the final attempt to crush the human threat once and for all. Varkan stood at the helm of his flagship, staring out into the vastness of space. The humans were waiting. He could feel it in the air. They were unpredictable, yes, but now he understood them. They had nothing left to lose, and that made them dangerous beyond measure. In his mind, the plan was set this time. The humans would fall. The Tizol would overwhelm them with brute force, as they had always done. There was no way their primitive, chaotic tactics could hold up against such a force. And yet, deep inside, there was a nagging feeling, a whisper of doubt that he tried to shake off. Humanity had already defied the odds so many times. What if they had something else up their sleeve this time? The first wave of the Tizol fleet surged forward, launching their advanced weaponry in synchronized strikes, targeting the human ships in a concerted effort to wipe them out. But the humans didn't flinch. They didn't even try to outrun the bombardment. Instead, they waited. Varkan watched in disbelief as a series of mining explosives, humble, simple, and utterly unremarkable, detonated in the middle of Tizol space, creating chaos unlike anything he had ever seen. The explosions were deafening, rippling through space and sending shockwaves across the battlefield. For a brief moment, the stars themselves seemed to flicker as debris, dust, and wreckage scattered in every direction. The Tizol were caught off guard, their own advanced technology struggling to make sense of the pandemonium. The human ships, ever unpredictable, had unleashed the simplest of weapons, and yet the effect was devastating. The Tizol were thrown into disarray, their communications scrambling, their fleets colliding in confusion, as their once perfect strategies crumbled before the onslaught of sheer chaos. Varkan stood frozen, watching as the battle unfolded before him. His mind raced as he tried to process what had just happened. How had something so simple, so primitive, caused this much destruction? The Tizol, who had relied on precision, on order, on exacting calculations, were now scattered and disoriented. The humans had taken them down with what seemed like little more than random explosions and unpredictable moves. And yet, it worked. The Tizol fleet was reeling. Their once strong formations had fractured, and the human ships, though fewer in number, seemed to move with a wild, almost joyful abandon, taking advantage of every crack in the Tizol's defenses. It wasn't about power, it was about adaptability, and the humans had proven once more that they were masters of the battlefield when it came to pure unpredictability. Varkan's heart sank as he realized the inevitable. The battle was lost. There was no salvaging the situation now. His fleet, once a symbol of invincibility, was crumbling before the onslaught of human ingenuity. With a final, bitter order, Varkan commanded the retreat. The Tizol ships, now vulnerable and disoriented, began to pull back. They had no choice but to withdraw, to lick their wounds and accept the crushing truth. They had been beaten by something they had never truly understood. As the Tizol fleet retreated into the darkness of space, Varkan stood on the bridge of his flagship, staring out at the disappearing human ships. He felt a mix of anger, disbelief, and something he had never expected to feel in the face of defeat: respect. These humans, with their stupid weapons, had managed to do what no other species had ever come close to doing. They had defeated the Tizol, not with superior technology or brilliant tactics, but with the very unpredictability that Varkan had initially underestimated. He let out a heavy sigh, rubbing his temples as the weight of it all settled in. He had fought against countless enemies, outwitted so many civilizations, but never before had he faced a species like this. The humans, with their crude, unsophisticated tools, had taken down the might of the Tizol Empire. It was almost laughable. The last of the human ships disappeared into the stars. Varkan found himself muttering a phrase under his breath, something he never thought he'd say in a million years. "Humanity," he said, his voice laced with reluctant admiration, "is the stupidest species I've ever encountered." But even as the words left his lips, there was no bitterness in them. Instead, there was a begrudging respect, something deep and profound. For all their flaws, for all their unpredictability, the humans had won. They had managed to turn their greatest weakness into their greatest strength, and in doing so, they had taken down the Tizol Empire, a power that had ruled the galaxy for eons. It wasn't the weapons they used, nor the technology they wielded. It was their ability to think outside the box, to embrace chaos, and to adapt when others would have given up. Varkan watched the stars twinkle in the distance, a quiet realization settling over him. The Tzal had lost. And it was all because of one simple truth. Humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their technology. It was their sheer, unrelenting will to never stop, no matter how absurd or chaotic the situation. They fought in ways the Tzal could never have anticipated. And in the end, that was the difference between victory and defeat. As Varkan's ship slipped back into the darkness of space. Retreating to the safety of the Tzal Empire, he couldn't help but feel a strange sense of awe. The humans had not only survived, they had triumphed. And in doing so, they had earned the respect of the most powerful empire the galaxy had ever known. The war was over, and humanity had won. In this final part, Varkan accepts the defeat of his empire at the hands of humanity's unpredictability, realizing that it wasn't the weapons that mattered, but the mindset that made the difference. A reluctant respect for the human species settles in, marking the end of the conflict. Let me know if you'd like to adjust anything, or if you need any changes.